All right, carry on. Sorry, I
Okay,
missed recording to start this.
Yeah, so last week I spoke to Celeste Horgan from one of the tech writers from the CNCF. She did a great review of Contours docs, and the CNCF are sort of spinning up a docs review process. And I sort of pinged her and said, hey, is there something like that for Kubernetes that we could do? She said, I don't know, I'll check with SigDocs. Like she said, oh, I can do a CNCF one, but I don't know if SigDocs will want me to do that. But they were like, no, it's fine. So she is going to have a look over, or someone who she gets to do it. She will organize someone having a look over our docs and sort of a technical, but I don't know anything about this specific thing, reader. What do they think about our docs? I mean, I think as of today, the experience is woeful if you are technical, but don't know very much about what we're trying to achieve with Gateway API. So like Rob said, I'm going to spend some time this week. Rob, if you ping me that name of that plugin, I'll have a look and see if there's anything I can do quickly to do that. I'll have a play with it. So I think, and I'll see if I can do some docs updates since I'm looking at the docs and I'm thinking about V1 Alpha 2 anyway. I'll see if I can push in any updates. I think the biggest update is going to be the route attachment one once we get that PR merged in, is to do a docs update to handle that one, because that's completely different to what it was.
Yeah, that PR, like I haven't gotten into docs yet, but even just examples, it's changing a lot. That's going to be our biggest one to document and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sounds really, really great. I'm excited to have more docs reviews and more work on docs, because like woeful, I think is the word you used, is very good. Accurate, I would say. So yeah, that's got to be our focus for the next couple weeks at least, to try and get them up to date and reasonable. And really, I think what has naturally happened is when we've merged V1 Alpha 2 PRs in, we've either missed documentation or just kind of added it here and there, and it may not have made sense where we added it. Like we don't have a reasonable structure anymore. So taking a look back and trying to structure things in a meaningful way is going to be a huge thing as well.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping that Celeste review. She did a lot of talking for Contour about our information architecture and suggestions for ways in which we could approach that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about the information architecture yet until I get someone who knows what they're doing to suggest some things.
Perfect.
Yeah. But yeah, I will try and make sure that the pages we have are, either correct themselves or have an issue open to correct them or something like that. So that,
cool.
If I can't get to all of the things myself, that we at least have a burn down list for the doc changes.
Yep. Great. Well, thanks for setting that up. Yeah,
no problem.
Cool. All right. Well, let me keep on moving here, but I think we're in pretty good shape. I'm hopeful that we can get this in and ready for review this week, with all these PRs in, but of course it'll just take that kind of continued effort on the review front, but at least the PRs exist or almost exist. So cool. The next one, so let me just say, I don't think there's a whole lot of prior art here or any prior art here, but if anyone has suggestions for the review process and how we make that work, currently my working theory is some kind of PR that's based on master that goes into some kind of new branch that doesn't have V1 Alpha 2 in it yet, is approximately what makes the most sense. But if anyone is more familiar with this or has ideas on how we can make API review relatively easy for the Signet reviewers, I am very interested in ideas, options, whatever. But
should we have a session that walks people through it? I don't know how the scheduling would line up, but just like half an hour to just set some context before dropping people into a very big thing.
I think it's going to be hard to find time where everyone overlaps, but I was planning on reaching out to them on Slack and seeing if that would be helpful. And maybe it's a couple one-off meetings if timing doesn't work for all of them. I don't know, but I'm very happy to help out with that.
3-4 meetings. So yeah.
Yeah, there's only 4 that have signed up, so it's not, it's not a huge amount. Yeah, so if anyone, first I need to confirm that that's actually helpful and interesting to them. But assuming it is, if anyone is interested in being part of those, let me know. And
I wonder if we want to have a Slack with just the reviewers. So if they have questions,
okay.
they can do it asynchronously.
Yeah, I thought about that, but I wasn't sure if that was sufficiently different from our like SIG Network Gateway API Slack channel.
I see. You just have it in the main channel.
Yeah, like our main channel is not that noisy usually.
That's true. Yeah, then we don't need to worry about crosstalk.
Okay.
Yeah, put me
down.
Yeah,
and if it, what's that?
Yes, when you have that review, yeah, please include me as well.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know. I'm just gonna ask if it's useful, and if it is, then I'll set that up, and anyone who's interested can join.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, I kind of feel like with respect to the PR thing, the like it feels like they're going to need to be reviewing pretty much the whole set of APIs, Go files, and the docs that we have both there and in like on the website. So like it feels almost like you could just be like, here's the V1 Alpha 2 branch, off you go, or something like that. Like
yeah, no, I almost thought about that, but it feels like we need to have some kind of mechanism for comments and back and forth and updates and that kind of thing, which
a PR is probably the easiest thing.
Yeah, but as a PR is going to get overloaded. We have gaps that have hundreds of comments or over 100. I imagine this will get more than that. I don't know. We'll see. But as a starting point, I mean, we've never done this before. It seems like a reasonable start, and if we need better, we'll figure it out, I guess. But cool. All right, the very last thing, well, no, not the very last thing, but the thing that I wanted to highlight is something that we talked about in doc form last week. I want to say it's kind of been, I had this doc that I had thrown in Slack earlier and got some good comments on it, and had a variety of discussion in Slack and on the doc about this. And I figured I'd at least throw it into a gap and see where it landed. The reason I'm bringing this up in this context is, from my perspective, V1 Alpha 2 is potentially our last alpha release. I don't know that for sure, but I want to at least give us the chance for it to be our last alpha release. I would love to be able to go to beta from V1 Alpha 2. So that means at a minimum, we can't remove things. We can do things to convert, we can whatever. But if there's anything we're uncertain about, we should try and remove it now while we can we have this opportunity to make a truly breaking change. Now we can make other changes, we can do things that are convertible, but I don't know that there's much precedence for like completely removing something on the way to beta. Maybe there is, I don't know. But I wanted to at least explore this.
That we don't have to worry about on the way to beta, but yes, we should try not to do it.
Yeah, right.
Because things get completely changed on the way to beta historically.
Yeah, that's true. But I know I had some on endpoint slice. I had some. I don't know. It seems like maybe the bar is the guidelines have changed.
Completely renamed.
Yeah, that's true. Rename is
like removal.
You would think, but rename is something that they consider, like, because it's fully convertible. You can translate between API versions. It's great, but if you completely remove something, that's considered breaking. But I don't know.
So it feels like what we're aiming for with V1 Alpha 2 is like beta release candidate, essentially. Like
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll admit that it may be too optimistic, whatever. But I don't want to leave anything off the table. Like if there's something we're uncertain about, I'd rather not include it than include it and then wish we'd taken this opportunity to remove it. That I'd say that's my primary thinking here. And so this gap is really tiny, and well, the consequences are larger, but the actual API changes are tiny. The API change is really just remove TLS cert ref from route and add a namespace field to the cert ref on gateway. So it's probably our smallest gap yet in terms of API change, but it is something that we have had. So I don't think anyone's actually implemented this. Is that correct? The certificate ref on route are there any implementations out there that support it yet with Gateway API?
I can't remember if we do or not. We definitely were planning to.
Okay.
Exactly how it works is complicated. Really complicated.
Yeah, and that's what it was. So one of the things that actually is in the V1 Alpha 2 milestone was a PR that I had started with, which was trying to clarify the documentation and clarify how it worked. And that kind of got hung up. And as I was writing it out, it felt increasingly confusing and prone to something that would cause issues, confusion, and many conflicts. And it felt like something that we could potentially solve just with the direct ref from Gateway and maybe automation if necessary. And that's where this gap came from, right? It was just, can we accomplish many of the same things without the same confusion, without the same room for conflicts, etc. That's the fundamental thinking here, but I wanted to get some broader feedback, and I don't think there's anything particularly new in this gap that wasn't already in the doc. But yeah, what are people thinking about this idea?
I think that we just need to have an answer for the people who want magic, for lack of a better word. We have definitely had requests on Contour for ages, and there were definitely requests earlier on for people who want to, whose use case is something like, as an app developer, I have my own TLS details that I want to supply for my service, like for my, to be terminated by something that I don't control. I want to be able to supply some TLS details, and I want them to be, to be wired up for me, and I don't want to have to edit the gateway to do that. And those are the two key things, that the app developer owns the TLS details, and that they don't want to have to give gateway edit access to app developers to enable them to put that on the gateway. And they don't want to have coordination between the gateway owner and the route owner to say it's this specific secret or something like that, right? Like they want to just be able to have some way in which you can do this. The problem is, right, the more magic you make it, the easier it is for people to accidentally blow things up or to expose services they shouldn't, or that sort of stuff, especially when you start going cross namespace. So I'll have a look over that, but that's definitely the use case that I think I certainly expected the HTTP route TLS support to be for, is for people to be able to, for app developers to be able to say, I've done my own work, I've got my own TLS key pair that I want to secure this specific service with, and I mean, obviously that's going to include the hostname most of the time, but maybe not always. Like that's the problem, is people want it to be really magic without having to worry too much about the implementation details, which puts the implementation complexity involved squarely on the actual gateway implementers. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I guess something, coming from my perspective, or this is really more of a question, how common is it for app developers to be providing their own certs versus using something like Cert Manager or some other kind of form of generated cert for their dev domain or whatever other domain they're interacting with? Is that a pretty common feature request
I certainly haven't had that exact feature request, but so we've got a really old issue in Contour, and I remember this title because every time I look at it, it stabs me in the eye. Is it something like HTTP proxy design creates bad lifecycle management or something like that? And their complaint is basically that because we have this mandated thing where there's a root HTTP proxy that's owned by the person who owns the domain, and then child HTTP proxies have to be put in singular, like by references by name from the person who owns that root HTTP proxy, then it means that the people who are downstream of that have to either have edit access to the top level one, or there needs to be a strong level of coordination between the two things. And I was like, well, that's why we actually designed HTTP proxy specifically to force that strong level of coordination between the two actors. And that API was specifically designed to make you do that. And so I was kind of annoyed at the guy who locked it, to be honest. But the point is that people definitely want there to be a more magic way that's more akin to what you can do, to the sorts of crazy shenanigans you can pull with ingress, where sure, I have 7 ingresses that all define the same host name and route different paths out to different services. And they all reference the same TLS or something like that. Like that's the sort of thing people just, I don't want to have to think about this. You've got to make this problem go away for me. And then the fact that they don't want to have to think about it means that a lot of the time they haven't thought about the weird edge cases that you're going to come up with once people start claiming different domain names on different certs or something like that.
Yeah, I think like the question we were asking with this is, does that magic need to live here, or could it be governed by a separate system where it is fairly well factored out? For example, the magic could involve let's encrypt, could involve some kind of facilitation of like handing out certificates to people. But it sounded complicated and factored out enough that it may make sense to live kind of on the side of this, but not directly inside here.
Yeah, and I think I'd echo those concerns. I think one of my concerns and this came from writing that PR that was trying to explain this, is the trust model here, that a route in namespace A can somehow affect a route in namespace B or C. Basically, when a route trusts a gateway, it trusts all the other routes that gateway trusts, specifically for certs. And so there's kind of this, if this gateway trusts routes in these 3 namespaces, I as a route owner need to know that and also trust those same namespaces, which maybe that's okay, but it gave me some room for consideration that maybe this is something I don't know what it is yet, but maybe there's some vulnerability lurking here that we haven't completely understood yet. I don't know.
So I kind of think that the proposal here definitely prevents or removes any support for the kind of workflow that Nick was just describing. I think the simplification is a good thing, and I'd argue that maybe it's even good from like a conceptual point of view, because we're saying, okay, this is the thing. Here's one thing which Gateway API does, and if you want higher level stuff, then you should build something higher level on it. And I kind of think that's okay. I think it's okay for a Gateway API to say this is what I am.
Yeah, I think the important thing, Rob, I haven't read your GEP, but it was in doc. It's like it doesn't remove the fact that you could build the infrastructure. It's more like you need to describe it in such a complete detail at this layer, which I think is an interesting distinction we should make. Like nothing will prevent awesome cert thing from being built on top of it, versus that the fact that awesome cert thing needs to actually exist inside here.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, when I was trying to document the existing state, it became clear that it was, one, confusing, but two, that the entire purpose of cert on route was just as a shortcut to attach that cert to the listener. And the idea that people could attach multiple certs, conflicting certs, etc. that way involved a lot of potential for conflicts and additional bits of status we might need. And it's really just a shortcut mechanism. It's not really anything that it feels like there's a better way to accomplish that shortcut without messing up or confusing the API. But that's my own bias here. I think there were a few others that were trying to say something. Yeah, go ahead, Micaiah.
I was wondering about the trust issues you mentioned. Is it a matter of you trust all the other routes on the gateway? I trust that no one will claim the host name before I can claim it, or is there something else there?
I think it's the idea that someone can choose to specify a cert for your host name, and that is what you're stuck with, essentially. And it's not a gateway owner, it's another route owner in another namespace. And they're specifying a cert on your behalf that you may not like. I mean, that's kind of a dumb, I don't know, but just that unexpected mechanism feels like it's ripe for unexpected things to happen. I don't know what they are. I'm unsure. I can't think of any vulnerability associated with it, but it feels similar to other things that have turned into vulnerabilities, but this may not be that. It probably isn't.
So it sounds like you're saying we have these different ways of specifying a certificate, and whatever way you do, the certificate's thrown into a big bundle of certificates. Whereas in my mind, I'm thinking a route specifies a certificate. That's the certificate you use if that route is used, and the route is going to be selected based on things like host name and possibly other rules, path maybe, assuming that your ingress controller is terminating TLS and can look at the path, the host header and the path in the request.
I guess I don't know if we have enough validation to make that true.
Yeah, I think the problem is that when you do when you do the dance, right? If you've got multiple certs that all want to talk for the same host name, if they're not exactly the same cert, then like you have a problem, because like at the TLS negotiation point, which one do you use? Like you don't have enough information at the TLS negotiation point to know if there are two conflicting routes that both specify certs for hostname.com or whatever, then you don't have, all you have at that point is the SNI while the TLS negotiation is finishing, and that's if you're terminating. And so the only thing that you can use to choose which certificate to have is SNI. That's literally what it's for. So you can't, I don't think that it's really valid to have a route, different routes specify things on anything other than host name. And so I guess the thing is there that you can end up with the same problem that you have in, if you allow people to specify their own cert for a host name, the thing you have to handle as part of that is what happens if someone has if there's a conflict, and how do you tell that there's a conflict, right? Like that means that basically your ingress controller will have to go in, decode the cert, check check subject alternate names or CNs to check that the host and that the host name that it says it's for is what it's actually for, and stuff like that, which is like quite complicated, right? Like you don't want to do that if you don't have to.
Right, and to build on that, not only do you have to check that, would have to specify that in the API, and then add I think a lot more status than we currently already have to properly communicate those conflicts. But yeah, those are my concerns. Micaiah,
Yeah.
I think you have something very similar in OpenShift, but I think you have a few more validation bits of validation that help make it more manageable for your use case. I think go ahead.
Well, there are two things. One, you mentioned, or Nick mentioned, validating certificates, we actually do validate certificates in our ingress controller, and we'll complain if you give us, well, something invalid. The other thing is, I think I see what you're saying. If you have two routes, are you saying if you have two routes with the same host name and say they match on different paths, and each route specifies their certificate, you need to know which certificate to use to terminate TLS so that you can then do the path match?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is an
That's-
issue.
Yeah, so it's different than if you're using, like, the point of TLS route is literally to handle this case, right? Like that the route discriminator you want to use is the SNI only, right? Like the host name, but only the SNI host name. Whereas in it's the HTTP route implies that you're terminating and being able to look at the thing so you can route and stuff like that. But that doesn't change the fact that at the TLS negotiation point, the only information that a implementation that's terminating TLS has is the TLS details, like the SNI plus the cipher suites and stuff like that. That's all it has. And stuff that's in the certs, obviously CNs and SANs and stuff like that. But that's it. That's all it's got. Until it's finished that, and then it can look at the route, the path and headers and stuff like that. But it can't do that until the TLS is finished, and so you have no way to pick which cert it's going to be based on. If the certs are different based on things that are not the SNI and like CA and stuff like that, then it's not gonna. You can't use it as a discriminator. You just don't have enough information. And so, and the thing that arises then, and this is one of the reasons we haven't done it in Contour, is if you have, it's kind of, I think we kind of intended that if you're going to do this, the way that you're going to practically use it is there'll be a wildcard cert on the gateway, and then you can supply a more specific cert on a route if that's what you want, right? Like that seems to me to be the most likely intended use case. So I can do star.foo.com, and and then blog.foo.com as and have blog.foo.com as a separate cert that comes in on a route instead of on the gateway. And that's because you don't want to give people with route access to edit the gateway to put the cert on the gateway. But I think the Bowie's point is fair that you don't have to give them access to that if you build a higher level controller to do this flow. And that's the thing that we need to recommend to people is you can't build that into this API and still have the API be simple to understand or use, because there's so many weird edge cases. Like you need to build a higher level construct that watches a set of routes with a certain label or something like that, or that wires up the pieces for you and understands and can do validation and stuff like that. And building that into this route is building that into this level of the API, like, is bringing down sort of higher level constructs into this level of the API, which complicates the API enormously.
I think like one of the things that in the discussion, I know that this topic has come up before. Actually, we spent quite a bit of time on it last year. It wasn't clear, 100% clear that, let's say we put it in the route, that is an appropriate place for all use cases. I think that's what one of the biggest concerns would be, is that if you put in the route, you kind of lock people into a certain way, for example, for people to represent that they want a certificate added to the gateway, and then a certain way to enforce and kind of grant that permission. And it felt like, at least with certificates, a lot of the infrastructures are fairly complex in terms of how permissions would be mapped and so forth. Like there's even some degree of organizational structure that's built into it. Maybe everyone has access to certificates, maybe the groups are different. So the difficulty is that if we put it into the API now, we might be basically mandating a certain way of doing things, which may not make sense in the broader context. Like I know that there was a lot of discussion about like, oh, well, what if we have some resources to represent like who owns what host names and so on and so forth. But that's like a very complicated thing, because that in some ways maps to like organizational structures, which may not be so nice as to how Kubernetes resources are parceled out.
I guess at the end of the day, my opinion on this one is that V1 Alpha 2 is a time when, like Rob said earlier, we should be striving to make the API as slimmed down and directed and maybe, like James said, opinionated as possible for now, so that then if we want to add things later, we can. But we want to be able to explain to people, this is what the API is, and this is what it does, and this is how it's intended to be used. And if your use case doesn't fit, then let's talk about it. But this is the slice of functionality we're aiming at for right now. It's not finished. We can add more, but this is what we're aiming for right now.
So but in that light, though, like Micaiah, we should write down the use case and understand that it is possible to layer it on top, and kind of what a system, maybe we could have a generic mechanism that fits this use case, but doesn't necessarily need to kind of go inside the current route data structure. I definitely think it's useful because it is a self-service thing, as Nick, you said, that you do have Contour users who want it. So yeah, I'm definitely feel like as a project we should give all the implementers who have customers who have this use case some reasonable path versus just like, hey, like this is something that we fill in, sort of like exercise left for a reader.
Yeah, I sketched that out in this gap. This is not a great deal of detail here, but I tried to explain what a controller might look like that does this. And I think it's actually a pretty compelling use case for a controller, right? We have great examples already of controllers that automate cert attachment, right? It's not a new concept in Kubernetes. And I think it would allow a more natural way to represent this, of if that controller could be configured with something that said, I trust certs for this domain from this namespace, or this set of domains from this namespace. You end up with a much more powerful and robust way to do this, with, I think, a better end result. And we're enabling that. It's important to note that this GEP has two parts, right? The one part is removing the cert ref from routes, but the other part is allowing cross namespace refs from gateway. So that allows for that ability to attach a certificate from an app namespace to a gateway and potentially others. But I think that is actually a fairly powerful thing that does enable all this kind of automation in what I think would be a better end state, personally.
So it feels like, Micaiah, I know that you've definitely got use cases in OpenShift that do that, especially looking over the link that Harry just put in. So yeah, I'm interested more in your thoughts here.
Yeah, I need to think about it more. I can see the value of having a separate controller. It's hard for me to envision and feel confident that that will be overall less complexity, but I need to think about it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, obviously, because we've got requests for Contour for the same thing, I'm going to need to think about it too. And so yeah, you and I can catch up about this offline, maybe Micaiah, and talk about it a bit more. I'll have a look at this GEP, Rob, and see if I can. It makes sense to me that I mean, it could be that the higher level controller is part of the implementation of an ingress controller, right? Like, but it's just that it's, then an extended part of the API, or a recommendation about how you consume the API or something like that, rather than a mandated core support part of the objects. Yeah, and yes, Bowie, you make a good point that it should be coherent with Cert Manager as well. Yeah,
because I know that Cert Manager is looking at Gateway. They have a proposal for how to support it, and it would be great if like the two kind of work in the same way.
Yeah, and this, I think this was one of their points of
confusion.
Yeah, I think this was one of their points of confusion of how or if they should support certs on routes. Yeah, but I agree. We should try and make sure this is all coherent and it makes sense with the Cert Manager and any other kinds of automation. Yeah, my preference right now is obviously to try not to include it in V1 Alpha 2, but this is admittedly a small enough change that maybe we don't need to block API review on this specific thing. But I would love to have those discussions and make sure that we can come to a conclusion on this relatively quickly, because if we don't go forward here, I really need to go back to my other PR that tries to clarify exactly how this cert attachment from route works and make it make a bit more sense.
Yeah, I think I just spent a little bit a second reading the previous comments on the thing, and I think one of the key part is, as Rob said, that in this one, the other thing that's important here is that there is a mechanism here to do the cross namespace refs and have the refs be allowed or disallowed, and that's the reference policy. But like the idea here is to take the reference policy thing that we're using for services right now and to apply it to secrets for this use case.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
Again, the thing is that the secret can live in a namespace, a separate namespace that people don't have access to, that can have reference policies that say what gateways it's allowed to be used in. And so you can have it live in the namespace where your route says that, and a reference policy that says this can be used in a gateway, in this specific gateway. And so that then is a mechanism that a high level controller can use to actually pull the certs in. And that also means that there's a point at which the controller that's handling this can reject the thing at some point, and there's a place where you can surface that information, and that's the reference policy. You can say, I can't, this reference policy is allowed, but I can't, but you can't do it for other reasons or something like that. So there's a status point where you can get information about what's going on.
Yeah.
So the idea of giving the ingress controller or the gateway controller implementation, gateway API implementation access to all secrets in the cluster makes me nervous. And right, you can specify a reference policy, but what enforces reference policy? Isn't that the same thing to which you gave access to all the secrets in the cluster?
Yeah, so yeah, you're completely right. And so it depends on your security model. It depends on what you're comfortable with. It is entirely valid that we want this to be a different component altogether, right? That we want this to be a controller that watches certs and watches secrets in a specified set of namespaces and then attaches them to gateways and potentially other namespaces if you want to limit or reduce your risk. And similarly, you could deploy a gateway controller implementation that only had access to a subset of namespaces or secrets in a subset of namespaces. But I think we'd have the same access concerns, if not more, when it comes to attaching secrets to routes, right? In that world, a gateway implementation is going to have to be able to read all secrets in any namespace it supports routes, which is also a pretty elevated access. So this approach allows us to either separate that out into a different component that we maybe trust more, or I don't know. I feel like you're completely right. There's risk here, but that also makes me think that we shouldn't include this in route to begin with. But again, this is my very biased perspective on things.
That's a good point, and that reminds me that we did talk a lot about that in the issue that Harry linked, issue 103, where we talked about trusting the ingress controller to read all secrets in the cluster. And we actually discussed some ideas similar to, well, Cert Manager and similar to a controller like we're talking about now to copy, that would potentially copy secrets. This controller would be trusted to read all secrets and copy them into some common namespace that the ingress controller would then read them from. So that's to say, I'm starting to like this idea a little more.
Yeah, so I think it feels to me like the thing we all got to do is go away and read the gap and have a think about it and comment on it, and try and pull back these other things like what's Cert Manager doing with gateway support, you know, and how does this more dynamic use case work in a world where it's got to be the gateway, you know, and maybe it's as simple as the, you know, like you say, that the get as it stands has a suggestion for how you could do this. And maybe we just need to say, like, if you want to do this use case, it's not that you can't do it with the, you can do it with the API. It's just that you need to build another controller on top to do it safely. And if you're not willing to build that other controller on top, you're probably, whatever you build is probably not going to be as safe as you think it is.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. And actually, now that you mentioned Cert Manager specifically, we should, I can ping the Cert Manager maintainers that have been working on the gateway implementation. It would be good to get their feedback on this as well, since they're very familiar with this whole area.
Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for the great discussion on this. Just would appreciate any feedback, any comments on this. I'd love to make a decision on this week, if at all possible, because, you know, I'd love to have, you know, I recognize we can start the Signet review without this specific thing solidified, but I'd love to get it in one way or another sometime soon, so that we don't delay V1 Alpha 2. So yeah, just interested in your thoughts. I think this discussion has been very helpful, and I'll leave it there. This is pull request 749, if anyone's looking for it. I think the only other thing I had on the agenda was issue triage, or PR and issue triage. Before we go there, was there anything specific that anyone wanted to bring up? Any issues, anything that any concerns about V1 Alpha 2, anything else we want to get in or haven't gotten in? I'll take silence as great. Okay. So I don't think there's that much that we really need to get into for PR and issue triage today. I think we maybe should take our win and go with it. There's oh, wait, Harry, you did a version selection PR already? Okay, never mind. No idea this happened, but thanks, Harry. It looks like he's already dropped off. But glad this works, maybe. I don't have any PRs that I'm aware of that need attention right now. There is an interesting discussion on this one that could use some more eyes, but I don't think it's a blocker to V1 Alpha 2.
Rob, I have a question just to make it clear
Yeah.
for the group. When we edit the docs, we should be doing it in the V1 Alpha 2's directory, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Just
yeah,
because
exactly.
I think it's very easy for people just to be editing the original.
It is. It is very easy. And hopefully we can catch that in PR reviews, but yes, it is very easy to make that mistake. So yeah, the one
or
PR
something we can add to flag that. It's just going to be very easy for people to do.
I think it's going to be increasingly easy, and I think this has to be part of our versioning story, but I think our versioning story as a whole is going to change as we have docs for 2 versions that we want to show at the same time. You know, we want to be able to switch between them. And so as that changes, we'll need something to either label or I don't know. I don't know how to surface that, but yeah, it'd be good to make it clear. It's not that changes to V1 Alpha docs aren't valid. We just need to be clear that they usually aren't desired. Okay, so the one PR I want to cover today, and then I think that's all we have on here, is Harry added Harry added a PR that would add support levels to the resources as a whole. So this is gateway class, and HTTP route would be considered core, and TCP route, TLS route, basically all the L4 routes would be considered extended. And I think this maps with our current understanding of the API and what I think every implementation is doing today. My concern with this PR is that I still am holding out hope that we're going to have an L4 only implementation of this API, or some other implementation of this API where the conformance levels are kind of flipped and say HTTP route isn't supported or something like that. I don't know how to communicate that, but I just had a bit of a pause on this one and wanted to, get some broader feedback.
Oh, that's an interesting, I mean,
Yeah, I feel like at
everything
some point we're going to have
everything
to
is
do.
extended.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
sorry.
Go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like at some point we are gonna have to do like performance profiles anyway. Like you say an ingress controller is a thing that has core support for gateway class, and HTTP route with extended support for TLS route. A gateway, a load balancer with gateway support is one that has core support for TCP route and UDP route with extended support for HTTP route and TLS route, or something like that. Like, there's going to be different classes of thing that you're not, no matter what, you're not going to be able to just move routes between an ingress controller and a load balancer seamlessly, no matter what we do, because they're different things.
Yeah, and so it's hard to push back too much on this PR, because this is entirely accurate for our current state, but I don't want to lock us in too much to and maybe we never get an L4 implementation of this API, but I'd love to hope that happens. So I don't know, if you have any thoughts of how we can accomplish this. I think Nick used the keywords here. I think a conformance profile is something that we're going to need. I've been thinking about that in the context of conformance tests as well, how we actually structure those and how we tag them. Does this implementation support this resource, this feature, this, etc. But I think there's going to be some very common threads, and this PR represents what I think is by far the most common one of ingress type controller. So no need to spend too long on this one, but this is 7:52 if you have any thoughts on this. But yeah, I think that's all I had for today. If anyone else wants to add anything to the agenda, feel free. But otherwise, I guess we can have a minute or two back. All right, thanks everyone.